Will you be my date tonight? Single dad janitor found his CEO crying. She looked up and asked. The echo of heels and distant laughter drifted through the marble hallways of the Grand Royal Hotel. On the other side of the lavish ballroom, where champagne glasses clinked and violins hummed, the women's restroom sat in elegant stillness. Ben adjusted the strap of the vacuum on his shoulder, his maintenance uniform slightly damp from the evening rain. He glanced down at his daughter, Emma, just 4 years old, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny with sleepy eyes. Almost done, baby girl, he whispered, kissing the top of her curly head. Just 1 floor left, then we can go home. She nodded quietly, tugging on his hand as they reached the women's restroom. Then he froze. From behind the door came a sound, not the usual clatter of heels or idle gossip, but crying, a low, broken sob, muffled by layers of silk and pain. Ben gently knocked. Excuse me? Is everything all right in there? No answer, just another stifled sob. He glanced down the hall, no one in sight. Slowly, cautiously, Ben pushed open the door a few inches. The scent of expensive perfume clung to the air, but it was not strong enough to hide the salt of real tears. Inside, crouched in the corner near the vanity, a woman in a shimmering gold gown sat on the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. Her head was down, blonde curls falling over her face. Her back shook with every breath. Ben took a step closer, his boot soft against the polished tile. Miss, are you okay? She did not move. He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her trembling shoulder. Do you need me to call someone? Finally, she lifted her face. Ben blinked in shock. He recognized her immediately. Everyone did. Julia Hart, the CEO, the boss of bosses, the woman whose name sent half the company scrambling, the one always poised, powerful, untouchable. But right now, her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her lips trembled, and her eyes, usually sharp and calculated, were red and glassy with heartbreak. For a moment she just stared at him. Then, without warning, her voice cracked out, soft but clear. Will you be my date tonight? Ben's mouth parted. I am sorry, what? Julia sat up straighter, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, but not bothering to fix her ruined makeup. You heard me. Her voice was steadier now, but still brittle around the edges. I do not want to walk back into that ballroom alone. Not tonight. Not like this. Ben looked down at Emma, now quietly watching them both. Iceling trail. I am just the janitor, he said softly. Julia met his gaze, hers steady despite the tears. And tonight, that might be exactly what I need. Ben hesitated. This was insane. This was surreal. But there was something in her voice, not desperation, but honesty, and something in her eyes that said she was not asking for attention. She was asking for a way to stand again. He reached for a paper towel, gently handing it to her. She took it wordlessly. Then he offered his hand. All right, he said, trying to smile, but only if you let me bring my daughter. Julia glanced at Emma, then back at him, and nodded. A moment passed, then another, and just like that, everything began to change. Julia Hart stood on the balcony just moments before the gala began, the city lights reflecting in the glass of her champagne. She wore a gown that shimmered like gold under the chandeliers, her blonde hair curled to perfection, her lips painted a deep red. To the world she looked untouchable. 28, a self-made CEO, a name whispered with both admiration and fear. But beneath the expensive dress and flawless poise, Julia was unraveling. 10 minutes ago, she had found her boyfriend, Michael, her company's vice president, locked in a too-close embrace with a junior staffer near the stairwell. Their hands, their laughter, the guilty look that flashed across his face when he saw her. It shattered something inside her. What the hell is this? She had asked, voice trembling. Michael didn't even flinch. He simply shrugged. You think money makes you lovable? He spat. You think your success, your company, your $1 million condo can keep someone around? Julia had stood frozen. All you ever talk about is work, he added. You're beautiful, Julia. but cold. You don't make room for anything real. Did you think your bank account could buy love too? That was when she walked away, without a word, past the curious eyes, past the silent elevator, past the marble corridor where no one dared follow her, into the restroom, where she finally broke. She hadn't cried like that in years. Julia had built everything in her life to prevent this very moment. She had clawed her way up from nothing, abandoned by a childhood sweetheart who once said, "You're sweet, but I need someone with more ambition, more class." Those words burned into her soul. So she became more successful, more determined, more powerful than anyone ever expected. And yet, tonight, in a golden dress worth thousands, with a heart worth breaking, she found herself alone again. While just a few floors below, Ben was clocking in late for the night shift. The janitor uniform hung loose on his shoulders, his dark hair slightly damp from the drizzle outside. In one hand, he held a set of building keys. In the other, his daughter's tiny hand. "Come on, Munchkin," he murmured as he led Emma, his 4-year-old, down the corridor. "Last stop. Then bedtime and story time, deal?" Emma nodded sleepily, clutching her stuffed bunny against her chest. Ben didn't want to bring her tonight, but the sitter canceled last minute, and there was no one else. Ever since his wife passed away, 2 weeks after Emma was born due to postnatal complications, it had just been the two of them. He worked night shifts so he could be with Emma during the day, learned how to braid her hair watching YouTube videos, and made pancakes in smiley face shapes because that's what made her giggle. He was just a janitor, but to Emma, he was the whole world. When he heard the soft sound of sobbing echoing from the restroom, he knew he couldn't ignore it. He asked Emma to sit quietly on the bench outside, and then he knocked. Gently. No reply. And when he opened the door and saw the woman in gold crying on the floor, something in him stirred. Ben wasn't the kind of man to get involved in things beyond his station, but pain had a sound, and this woman, whoever she was drowning in it. He reached out. He asked if she was okay. Then came the sentence that would change everything. "Will you be my date tonight?" He hadn't answered right away. What could he possibly say? She was a CEO. He was a janitor. Their lives couldn't be more different. But then she looked at him, not like a powerful executive demanding attention, but like a woman desperately trying not to fall apart. So he said yes. And when Julia took his hand and looked at Emma with something almost like tenderness, Ben realized that maybe this night wasn't going to end the way he expected. Maybe, for once, it was just beginning. The ballroom doors swept open with a quiet whoosh, and the room turned to stare. Julia walked in first, tall and radiant in her gold evening gown, her shoulders squared, chin slightly raised. But it wasn't her confidence that made people freeze. It was the man holding her hand and the little girl in his arms. Ben stood awkwardly at her side, dressed in the cleanest shirt he owned, his janitor name tag hastily removed but the crease still visible. His daughter Emma clung to his shoulder, wide-eyed and quiet, her pink sweater slightly too big and one sock drooping. The room was silent for a moment too long, then the whispers began. "Who is he? Is that her boyfriend? He's holding a kid. Why would Julia bring a janitor?" Ben could hear every word. So could Julia. She didn't flinch. Inside, Ben wanted to run. He had no business being here, among champagne flutes and designer suits, among people who dined at places with cloth napkins, and didn't look over their shoulders every month for rent. He leaned down, whispering, "Julia, maybe this isn't a good..." But she squeezed his hand tighter. "You're exactly where I want you to be." They moved further in. Conversations stalled, turned into stares. Emma nestled into Ben's shoulder, her fingers gripping the collar of his shirt. One woman whispered too loudly, "What on earth is she doing?" Ben exhaled and raised his voice, enough to be heard by those closest. "I'm the janitor, just here as her date." A ripple of gasps, a few snickers, some scoffs. Julia didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the stage at the front of the ballroom, where her name was already projected on the backdrop. CEO of the Year, Julia Hart. She climbed the steps, took the mic. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the night. Champagne's decent, music's forgettable, dress code as usual, tragically predictable. A few polite chuckles, unsure. Then her voice dropped, calm but cutting. And some of you are wondering, yes, this man beside me is my date. The room went dead silent. Yes, he's the janitor, and he's more honest than those who say they love me while cheating behind my back. She turned her head, slowly, deliberately, and met eyes with Michael across the room. His face paled. The woman beside him froze. Julia smiled, just a little. A smile made not of cruelty, but quiet power. I've built this company from scratch. I've eaten rejection for breakfast, clawed my way into boardrooms where no one wanted me. I know what I'm worth, and I'm no longer interested in being loved for what I have, but for who I am. She looked at Ben, who was still rooted in place, stunned. This man, she said, voice softening, showed up when I needed someone. He didn't offer me flowers or lies, just honesty. And sometimes, that's all it takes. No applause, no gasps, just silence. And then the shift. A few nods. A few expressions softening. The tide was turning. Slowly. Michael turned away, muttering something to a colleague, but it was too late. Everyone had heard. Everyone knew. Julia stepped down from the stage, head held high. She took Ben's hand again. He looked at her like she was a stranger and a miracle all at once. I thought you were joking, he murmured. I wasn't. Behind them, Emma tugged at Ben's sleeve. Daddy, do rich people always whisper like ghosts? Ben chuckled, low and nervous. Only when they're surprised. Julia laughed, a real laugh, the first of the night. They left the ballroom not long after. No need to stay among people who only applauded when told. The night had already given them what they didn't expect. A little truth in a place full of performance. And as the doors closed behind them, someone finally clapped. Then another. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, but it was enough. The night air outside the hotel was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Julia let out a long breath as the cool wind brushed her cheeks, washing away the clinging perfume and tension of the gala. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk until she stopped, turning to Ben, who walked just a step behind with Emma nestled against his shoulder. You don't have to stay with me, Julia said quietly. I didn't mean to drag you into a circus. Ben shook his head. You didn't drag me anywhere. You just gave me a front row seat to the most interesting thing that's ever happened in my career as a janitor. Julia almost smiled. Almost. But then her stomach growled, loud enough for him to hear. She blushed and looked away. Ben smirked. Hungry? I barely touched anything in there, she admitted. The food looked like it was designed to be admired, not eaten. Ben chuckled. Come on, I know a place. 15 minutes later, Julia found herself sitting in a red vinyl booth at a diner tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store. The neon sign flickered outside. The smell of frying onions and grilled cheese filled the air. Ben set Emma down beside Julia, tucking the little girl's bunny into her arms. Emma's eyes were already heavy, her head nodding as she curled into Julia's side without hesitation. Julia stiffened at first, unused to such innocent trust. But slowly, her shoulders softened. She let the child's warmth rest against her. The waitress poured coffee for Ben and water for Julia. Your usual, hun? She asked him. Yeah, and maybe add a slice of pie, Ben said. Big night. Julia raised an eyebrow. You come here often? Every week, he said. Cheaper than cooking sometimes. And Emma loves the pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. Julia glanced down at the little girl breathing softly against her arm. A strange tenderness spread through her chest. She looked back at Ben. You're raising her alone? He nodded. Since the day she was born. My wife, she didn't make it through delivery. His voice dropped. I thought I'd drown that first year. But Emma, she kept me afloat. She gave me a reason to figure it out. To show up. Even if I had no idea how. Julia swallowed, her throat tight. She had heard stories like his before, but something about the calm strength in his voice, the way he didn't flinch or ask for pity, hit her differently. "And you?" he asked gently. "You looked shattered back there." Julia stared at the coffee cup between her hands. For once, she didn't put up walls. "My boyfriend cheated on me," she said bluntly. "At my own gala, in the stairwell, with someone who probably still calls me Miss Hart in the office." Ben let out a low whistle. "That's brutal." She gave a humorless laugh. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was his words. He said, "I only know how to buy things, that I'm cold, that money is all I have." Ben watched her carefully. "Is it true?" Her eyes shot up sharp, but he didn't look judgmental, just curious. "Honest?" "No," she whispered after a long pause. "I worked for everything I have because once, when I was young, a boy left me for being poor. I swore I'd never be left behind again. And now," her voice cracked, "now I have everything, and I'm still alone." Ben said nothing. He just let her words sit in the space between them, and somehow that silence comforted her more than any hollow reassurance could. By the time the food arrived, Emma had fallen asleep completely, her little head nestled on Julia's lap. Julia stroked the child's hair gently, her heart strangely calm for the first time that night. "She trusts you," Ben said softly, noticing the way Emma clung to Julia's dress. Julia blinked down at the girl. Her chest tightened again, but this time with something almost like hope. After a long moment, Julia looked back at Ben. "You're home," she said carefully. "Is it safe for her?" Ben hesitated. He didn't want to admit it, but he owed her honesty. "It's small, old, roof leaks when it rains. The heating barely works. I do my best, but she's been coughing lately. Doctor says it's probably the damp." Julia's brows furrowed. She looked at the child in her arms, then at the wary man across from her. "Then move in with me," she said suddenly. Ben blinked. "What?" "Move in. At least until Emma's better. My house has more space than I need. Dry walls, heat that works, a garden for her to play in." Julia's voice softened. "She deserves better than damp walls and coughing fits." Ben's mouth opened, closed. "Julia, it's too much. We barely know each other." Julia's gaze didn't waver. "We know enough to see what's real." He stared at her, torn between pride and gratitude, fear and relief. For a moment, he thought about saying no, about protecting his independence, about keeping the distance between their worlds intact. Then Emma coughed softly in her sleep, her tiny body shivering against Julia's warmth, and Ben's resolve cracked. For his daughter's sake, he couldn't refuse. Julia saw the answer in his eyes before he even said it, and for the first time in years she felt like she wasn't just saving herself with her wealth, she was saving someone else. Julia had never known what a quiet morning with crayons and toast could feel like, but in the weeks that followed their move-in, her mansion, once cold and echoing, filled with the sound of laughter, the smell of burnt pancakes, and the chaos of bedtime stories. Ben had taken over the small guest room. Emma's things were scattered between that room and Julia's sunroom, where she loved to nap beside the garden window. Julia found herself waking early, not for stock prices or board meetings, but because she wanted to be the one who braided Emma's hair before breakfast. They began forming small rituals. Ben brewed coffee while Julia made tiny sandwiches for Emma's lunch. On Saturdays, they built forts out of couch cushions. On Sundays, they made pancakes shaped like animals, Julia's often unrecognizable, which made Emma giggle until her stomach hurt. Ben, who had never had time to explore beyond survival, found himself learning how to draw trees and clouds, taught by Emma under Julia's supervision. And Julia, who had always considered cooking beneath her, now burned eggs beside Ben while laughing at her own clumsiness. He taught her how to dice onions. She taught him how to lose gracefully at board games. It wasn't grand or cinematic, but it was real, and in that simplicity, something bloomed. One evening, as autumn settled in with its golden chill, they celebrated Emma's 5th birthday in the garden. A homemade cake with lopsided frosting sat on the table. Streamers danced in the wind. Emma wore a paper crown, beaming as she blew out her candles. "Make a wish," Julia whispered. Emma closed her eyes, then blew hard. Ben raised his glass of juice. "To Emma, the light of our lives." "To Emma," Julia echoed, her eyes glowing. Later, after the cake was eaten and the stars began to peek out, Julia and Ben stayed behind to clean up. Emma had fallen asleep beside the fireplace, her bunny clutched tightly. As Julia reached for the plates, Ben stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. She looked up, his breath caught. She didn't pull away. The night air buzzed with something unspoken. They were inches apart. Julia tilted her head slightly. Ben leaned in. And the phone rang. Julia blinked, startled. She looked at the screen, frowned, and mouthed, "It's my mother," before stepping away to answer. Ben exhaled, watching her walk across the patio. He didn't mean to eavesdrop. He only went to take out the trash. But as he passed the hallway where Julia stood, he couldn't help but hear her voice, low but clear. "No, I haven't decided anything yet. No, I don't want to marry Henry. I told you, I'm not ready. I don't want to fall in love right now. I'm not even thinking about it." Ben froze. He stood in the shadow of the corridor, his hands clenched. Not ready. Doesn't want to fall in love. Doesn't want to think about it. He walked back into the kitchen in silence. When Julia returned, he was washing dishes, quieter than usual. She didn't notice. That night he tucked Emma into bed without saying much. Julia knocked softly on his door before going to sleep. He answered with a tired smile, but his eyes didn't meet hers. "Good night," she said. "Yeah, good night." He closed the door gently. She stared at it for a moment, confused. Something had changed. Something delicate had cracked, and neither of them knew it yet, but tomorrow would come with distance that wasn't physical. Only emotional, only silent, only sharp. Julia woke up to silence. No clinking of dishes, no soft little footsteps thumping down the hallway, no Ben humming off-key in the kitchen while Emma giggled nearby. Just silence. She blinked at the ceiling, confused. Something felt off. Not wrong exactly, but empty. Pulling the comforter aside, she sat up slowly, glancing toward the door. It was slightly ajar, and beyond it, the house was still, unnaturally so. She wrapped herself in a robe and stepped into the hallway, barefoot on the cold wooden floor. The guest room door stood wide open. The bed was made, neatly, too neatly, like a hotel room after checkout. The pillow didn't carry the soft indent of a child's sleep, nor the slight rumple of Ben's larger frame. She turned, scanning the living room. Gone. Emma's sketchbooks vanished from the coffee table. The pile of tiny shoes by the door, missing. The worn pink bunny she always carried, gone. And the old navy blue coat Ben always hung by the door? That hook was bare. Julia's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She opened the front door and stepped outside, into the sharp morning air. Bare feet on cold stone, the driveway was empty. No car note. Only the wind rustling through the trees and the thrum of her own heartbeat growing louder in her ears. She rushed back inside, grabbing her phone. Called his number. Straight to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. Her hands trembled as she typed. "Where are you? Are you okay? Ben, please, call me. Anything." No response. She sank into a chair at the kitchen table, and only then did she see the cake. Emma's half-eaten birthday cake still sat there, slightly lopsided. The frosting smeared from where tiny fingers had grabbed the edges. The candles from last night had melted sideways, now bent wax ruins. A single paper plate sat untouched. That was when it hit her. The first tears slipped down without warning. Not the kind she blinked away. Not the kind she hid in meetings or behind bathroom doors. This was different. This was heartbreak. Far from the city, in a modest motel off a quiet country road, Emma curled into the bed, the threadbare blanket pulled to her chin. She clutched her bunny like a shield. "Daddy," she whispered. "We left Miss Julia?" Ben sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the faded carpet. "Yes," he said softly. "Why?" His throat tightened. He couldn't answer right away. Did she stop loving us? That question, so innocent, so honest, cut deeper than any pain he'd ever known. "No, sweetheart," he whispered, voice breaking. "She didn't stop loving us. Maybe we just weren't meant to stay." Emma blinked, her small brows furrowed, confused, but she was too tired to ask more. Ben lay beside her, eyes wide open, staring into the dark ceiling. He remembered the way Julia smiled at Emma like she was hers, the quiet laughter at dinner, the softness in her touch, the way she almost kissed him back. But then, those words, "I don't want to fall in love right now." Had it meant nothing? Was it all just kindness? A passing moment of comfort she'd regret? He didn't know. But he couldn't let Emma get attached, only to be pushed away. So he did what he thought was right. He left, without a word, even if it broke something deep inside him to do it. Rain fell in gentle sheets over the city, soft and relentless, blurring streetlights into halos and soaking the pavement in a silver mist. Julia walked slowly beneath her umbrella, her heels clicking against the wet cobblestones. She had no destination in mind, just the desperate need to move, because standing still meant thinking, and thinking led to remembering, and remembering led to pain. Her thoughts spun in chaotic circles. The empty house, the silence, the unanswered calls. She hadn't eaten all day. Couldn't. The tightness in her chest left no room for food, just motion. She passed the old public library, a building she had loved since childhood. Its tall columns and worn stone steps still stood proud, even as the world changed around it. Closed for the weekend, but the soft glow from its entry lights spilled onto the sidewalk, offering a faint sense of warmth. That was when she saw them. Ben, his broad shoulders hunched against the chill, his arms wrapped protectively around Emma, who was nestled into his chest, her tiny bunny dangling from her hand like a forgotten dream. They sat huddled beneath the stone overhang, the only shelter from the drizzle. Julia froze, for a breath, maybe two, and then her heart kicked back to life. She ran. Her umbrella slipped from her grasp, landing behind her with a muted thud. The rain poured down, soaking through her coat, plastering her golden hair to her cheeks. But she didn't stop. She didn't think. She just knew she needed to reach them. Him. Ben looked up at the sound of footsteps just in time to see her appear, breathless and wild-eyed, tears and raindrops indistinguishable on her face. "Why did you leave without saying a word?" she asked, her voice raw. "Was I just another person who gets left?" Ben stood slowly, Emma still cradled in one arm, his expression somewhere between guilt and heartbreak. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said quietly. "I thought I was just a chapter, something temporary. You said you didn't want to fall in love, and I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought maybe we were just a pause in your life, a footnote." Julia's chest tightened. "You heard that?" "I didn't mean to. I was passing your room. I heard you say it on the phone." "That wasn't about you," she said, stepping closer, her voice rising over the sound of the rain. "My mother wants me to marry someone from her perfect world, some business partner's son. She said I needed someone on my level. I told her I wasn't ready to fall in love like that, calculated, arranged, cold." She stopped, taking a shaky breath. Her voice softened. "But I never said I wasn't already falling." Ben's eyes widened. The air between them thickened, heavy with the weight of unspoken things. Julia looked down at Emma, who blinked up at her sleepily, then reached for Ben's hand. "I missed you," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the rain. He stared at her for a moment, searching, unraveling, and then something in him gave way. "I missed you too," he said. Then he leaned in and kissed her. It was slow at first, uncertain, like testing the waters of something fragile. Then it deepened, filled with months of yearning and unsent messages, and nights spent wondering, what if? The rain fell harder, but they didn't move. When they finally pulled apart, Emma wriggled in his arms and clapped. "Yay, you're dating for real now." Julia laughed, pressing her forehead to Ben's chest. He wrapped one arm around her, pulling her in, while the other held Emma close. They stood there, soaked, cold, shivering, but whole. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Together. Sunlight streamed through the nursery windows, casting a soft golden hue over the pastel-painted walls. The room smelled faintly of lavender and new fabric, clean and full of promise. Tiny glow-in-the-dark stars dotted the ceiling like constellations waiting for bedtime, and the white bookshelves were already filled with classic fairy tales, alphabet puzzles, and soft stuffed animals. On the rocking chair, a folded quilt with embroidered elephants waited quietly for its turn to be used. Julia stood by the crib, one hand resting gently on her round belly, the other holding a delicate string of handmade paper butterflies. Her golden hair, loose and a little messy, glowed in the late afternoon light. She was smiling, softly, naturally, not the poised smile she wore at press events or boardroom negotiations. This smile was just for this room, just for her family, just for now. Ben appeared in the doorway with Emma riding on his shoulders, her tiny legs bouncing against his chest and her hands tangled in his hair. "We brought reinforcements," Ben called out, his voice filled with a kind of playful joy that only came out at home. "Butterfly Brigade reporting for nursery duty." Julia turned toward them, laughing lightly, as Emma slid off her dad's shoulders and dashed over with the unfiltered excitement of a 4-year-old. She wrapped her arms around Julia's waist and gently leaned in, pressing her cheek to the growing curve of her belly. "Hi, baby," she whispered. "I'm your big sister. I picked the teddy bear for you. He's the softest one, promise." Ben walked over, standing behind Julia and wrapping one arm gently around her, his hand resting on top of hers. His fingers curled protectively over her knuckles. "They're going to love it," he said, his voice low and sure. Together, they spent the next few hours making everything perfect, hanging the butterflies above the crib, organizing drawers full of impossibly tiny clothes, arguing sweetly about names, Ben leaning traditional, Julia favoring literary. Emma offered suggestions too, most of them inspired by cartoon characters or snacks. They laughed, they teased. They paused often to just look around, amazed by what they were building. It did not feel like preparing for a baby. It felt like preparing forever. As the sun dipped low and cast amber light across the floorboards, the three of them lay on the nursery rug. Julia sat with her back against the wall, her legs stretched out, cradling her belly. Ben lay beside her, one arm curled behind his head. Between them, Emma slept soundly, one arm draped across Julia's knee, the other clinging to her favorite bunny. Julia turned her head to look at Ben. Her eyes were soft, luminous. "You saved me the day I cried in that restroom," she whispered. Ben didn't speak right away. He just stared at her, his gaze full of the kind of love that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, but stays. He reached over and gently brushed a damp strand of hair from her cheek. "And you saved me," he said, "every day after that." They leaned in, their foreheads touching, the moment wrapped in silence, like a prayer. Outside, the wind stirred the trees gently. Inside, there was only peace. And between them, nestled in the hush of twilight, bloomed a quiet, steady truth. She had everything but love. He had nothing but love to give. Now, together, they had it all. And so, from a chance encounter in a quiet restroom to building a home filled with laughter and love, Julia and Ben prove that true connection doesn't care about status, titles, or where you come from. It only cares about the heart. If this story touched you, warmed your heart, or made you believe in love again, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Kindness and Love Tales. Because here, we believe that sometimes the most powerful stories start in the most unexpected places. See you in the next tale.